views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Coming up, a conversation on rhetoric and race in our community and country, plus a look at housing, education, health, and more. I'm David Lesh, taking you inside New York State Senate District 33 right now. Hello and welcome to In the District, where we sit down with elected leaders from around the Bronx for insight and education on local issues, events, and legislation. On today's show, we'll sit down with Senator Gustavo Rivera of the 33rd District, including the neighborhoods of Kingsbridge Heights, East Tremont, Crotona Park, Fordham, Belmont, Van Nest, Claremont, Highbridge, and Morris Park.
You actually forgot University Heights.
That is a lot of district.
There's a lot of district there.
Senator, let's get right into what's been going on around the country. I'm not too happy about it. I'm sure you aren't either.
I am not, sir.
What are your thoughts?
Well, first and foremost, I think that we need to send our thoughts and prayers to the family of Heather Heyer, who passed away, who was murdered by a white supremacist who purposely drove his car into a group of people to hurt those that were standing against what he stands for, which is he's a Nazi through and through. It is clear from his Facebook postings, etc. So he did this on purpose. So we send our thoughts and prayers to her. I think that what's important to understand here is that this is I'm very sad to say, but not surprised to say that it has been aided and abetted by an administration, which I refuse to refer by any other name except the Orange Madness. It is sad, but again, not unexpected. We who have seen this administration and the things that he has been doing since he was a candidate, we could see this coming, and it is unfortunate and it is sad, but it is not surprising. What we need to make sure that we focus on is the things that we have to do, the positive things that we can do in our community. To make sure that we identify those folks who are doing good work in our community, we support them. We stand up when we see something when we see racism, when we see sexism, when we see xenophobia, we have to stand up to it. And that is something that we have to practice every single day to make sure that we can fight back against
And I
this.
think it does come from the top down. You're right. And if the administration really doesn't come out strong with whether it's social media or any other form of media.
I mean, let's be clear about something. You have this person who is currently in the White House has found during his entire tenure there, and even before, whenever he found that there was somebody who had upset him, he named him or her. He named them explicitly, and yet he couldn't find himself with enough courage to be able to say clearly the other day, this was not a all sides type of thing. This was a violent act committed by a white supremacist against a group of people who were opposed to that agenda, to making America white again. They were opposed to it. That's why this person drove the car through them. He couldn't find enough courage to be able to say that. Yet, when a black CEO from Merck, a pharmaceutical company, left a presidential, round table or what have you, he found it was very quick. He was very quick to name this person by name and then attack him and his company.
And you notice he didn't attack any of the other CEOs who've recently left that table. But
why would that be?
Yeah.
Maybe it's because this is a black CEO. I mean, let's be clear about this. Listen, I understand that there might be some folks who might look at, during the campaign, they might have had concerns about their economic well-being and their future. I get it. But let's be clear, we have to stand, there's only one side now. It was Joe Biden, former vice president, who tweeted the other day, immediately after the attacks, he says, there is only one side. There is the right side or the wrong side. And in this case, everyone, whether you support this administration or not, has to be very clear about what is happening here. Don't turn your eyes away from it. This is the reality. This is what we're facing right now. And we have to make a decision where we stand.
I think, but some of the CEOs say, well, maybe it's better, even if I don't necessarily agree with the president, I should just keep a connection to the White House and in this way I can maybe shape policy and not just run away and leave the table in terms of economic reform.
It's not running away. It is stepping out from inside. You can't put the fire from inside a burning house. You have to step outside of it and then fight with the rest of us against it. The argument that, I have not been given the opportunity. I had many opportunities during the Obama White House to visit the White House. I was invited a few times for different events, and I was very proud to go. If I was, and I have not been invited for anything, if I was, I would turn it down. Because I do not, it's the reason why I don't refer to him by name or the title that he's supposed to have. I don't think he deserves it. And I think the fact that, again, he stood in front of the American people and didn't have enough courage to attack a Nazi. Yeah. Let's be clear. This is not, we're not talking about people who might have had some different opinions about, these are folks who have an ideology which says that this country must be cleansed from the vermin that are not white. They say it explicitly, and they say it without hoods. That's the other thing. The most perverse part about this entire, the Orange Madness as I call it, the most perverse part of it is the fact that these people feel empowered now. They don't have to wear hoods anymore. Before, there's things that he's going to try to do in policy and that he will do in policy that we will have to fight back, and we will be able to take back the presidency, take back Congress, and at the state level we can fight and resist it. But the most perverse part, which is harder to fight, is this idea that these folks feel empowered now. They've come out from under the rocks and from out of caves, and they've said, now we're going to stand up and tell everybody, we want this country to be a white country, make America white again. That's what they say.
Let me ask you a question, Senator. Do you think that we're shaming them in terms of, at least on Twitter feeds or different places? I know celebrities are coming out and they're trying to identify exactly who goes to these rallies and what
Indeed.
they look like. I sometimes have a little bit of problem with that because, I don't agree with any of their positions, and I don't agree that anybody should really join this type of rally. But at the same time, we're taking pictures of them and then we're hoping they lose their jobs. I just don't know, where I stand.
I disagree with you, and I'll tell you why. We can have a disagreement. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I've found after becoming a senator, I've been in the Senate for 7 years, and I've actually had people who are Republicans, who are some of my colleagues in the Senate, who I have good relationships with, who I respect. Andy Lanza, for example, a state senator from Staten Island. Him and me have had really out and out debates about different issues, but ultimately he respects me as a person. He respects me as a senator. He understands that I'm speaking on behalf of my constituency, and we have a respectful dialogue at that point. These people are not Andy Lanza. These are folks who hold an ideology who says that the country must be cleansed. It is a very different thing than say, hey, I think that my taxes should be lower. That's one thing. I think that we should have when we're talking about charter schools or we're talking about anything like that. No. It's one thing to have a difference of opinion on those types of issues. On this thing, there can be no quarrel with this. We have to identify who these people are. If they are arguing that our country should be cleansed from everybody that looks like me, or who is Jewish, or who is homosexual, or who is black, etc., then they must be identified and they must be shunned. I think that I actually am very much in agreement with that, with those actions.
All right, let's shift the gears a little bit. It's unfortunate.
I feel a little bit passionate about this, as you can tell.
I completely understand that, and I guess we have to teach the kids young to make sure that they don't get caught up in these types of rallies. So it's back to school time, which I'm sure most people are not too happy about. Parents are, not necessarily the kids. Let's talk about it. We have a healthy...
It's called a transition, by the way.
It's a transition.
Hell of a transition.
It is. I'm working on it. All right, so let's talk about it. I know you have something coming on up in the Bronx. Let's talk about it.
Weirdly enough, it does have to do with what we just spoke about, because I think our focus for many of us has to be on what can we find that is positive in our communities. Who are the individuals and organizations that are doing good work in our communities? Let's identify them, let's help them, let's engage with them. And so, along with another one of my colleagues, Assemblymember Victor Pichardo, we're having what is, I believe, our third, might be, annual, we have backpack giveaways where we have events that we do in the district as a back to school thing, as a way to provide resources to some of the people that live in our district that might not be able to afford them. So we bring health screenings, we bring resources to them, we give the kids free backpacks, and we make ourselves available to them. We're going to be on August 25th at DeVoe Park from 3 to 6 p.m. both Assemblymember Victor Pichardo, my staff, and his staff, my staff, and myself will be there. It's a good opportunity to actually connect with the folks that live in our community, to just answer their questions, provide access to resources, and ultimately to just be reminded of why we do this job to begin with.
You know, getting back to the health care
Yes.
itself, you know, the Affordable Care Act and the debate that we've been having, I'm sure you have an opinion on that.
I do. I have a very strong opinion. I'm the ranking member in the Health Committee in the Senate currently, which means that when we get to the majority, hopefully soon, I'll be the chair of the Health Committee in the Senate. And when you consider that out of 62 counties in the state of New York, the Bronx is the unhealthiest one. There's a lot of work to do in this county. And I want to make sure that I, along with many of my colleagues and friends and organizations, do the work. So there is, as far as the Affordable Care Act, it has given millions of New Yorkers access where there was none before, which is one of the reasons why we will have to make sure to fight to keep it. We also have to make sure to fight the efforts by this administration to reshape the way in which money goes to states. Currently, as it refers to Medicaid, which is of course health insurance for those working class folks or just poor folks that can't afford to have private health insurance. The way that it works is that 50% of the cost is covered by the state and 50% of the cost is covered by the federal government, regardless of whether it is somebody who's just coming in for a kid coming in for a cold, or an elderly person coming in for cancer and everything in between. The current administration wants to reshape that to have what is known as block grants, which basically means you have this amount of money, so do with it what you will, which would mean billions of dollars less in the state of New York for health coverage. And ultimately, remember, regardless of your age, regardless of your gender, regardless of how much money you make, or your immigration status, you will get sick.
Yes.
And if you get sick, you ultimately, if you believe that if you get sick and you can't afford to be taken care of, then you should die, which certainly some people do. Well, if that's the case, then I have nothing to say to you. Yeah. But if you believe that we have some level of responsibility, and the fact is that individuals who are sick, who currently use the emergency room as primary care, those costs are going to go somewhere. We're going to pay for it anyway. So I think that not only do we have to fight to make sure the Affordable Care Act stays in place, but in the case of New York, I'm actually proud to be the sponsor of a bill which would create a single payer or Medicare for all, healthcare for all system in the state of New York, which would provide universal access to every resident of New York State, regardless of their immigration status. It would be funded by graduated taxes, meaning that based on your ability to pay, you would have both on payroll taxes and on taxable income that's non-payroll taxes. Those taxes would be assessed. Now, the thing is that the studies show that about 70 to 80% of people in the state of New York would actually pay less taxes with this plan than they would pay less for what they're paying currently for their health insurance. And the fact is that employers would no longer need to provide health insurance as part of their employment packages, because everyone would be eligible to have this system accessible to them.
All right,
those are just some points.
We have a lot more to get to.
Yes, sir.
Unfortunately, we have to take a quick break, but we'll have more with Senator Rivera when we return. Stay with us. we're back in studio continuing our conversation with Senator Gustavo Rivera. Senator, let's talk a little bit about an issue that's important that I've seen in our area. Our young people who seem to be incarcerated at a very young age. Let's talk about the age of majority and what your thoughts are.
Well, this year in the state of New York, and we've been trying to do it for a long time, up until we passed the budget in April, the state of New York was one of only 2 states across the country where the age of criminal responsibility was 16 years old, which meant that 16 and 17-year-olds were treated as adults, regardless of what crime they allegedly committed. We all know that that is it was just completely bogus way to approach this. 16 and 17-year-olds that commit a mistake, that make a mistake, should not be held to the same standard as an adult doing the same thing. And plus, when you consider that we're talking about every crime, it was actually a completely unfair way to be able to dole out justice in the state of New York. So I'm very glad to say that through many efforts, and I do have to give a shout out specifically to the Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Hastie, proudly from the Bronx, who had a steel spine during very difficult negotiations leading to the end of the budget, and we were able to get it done in the budget. It was not perfect, but what we were able to achieve was to make sure that in a period of, over a period of 2 years, it's going to come into effect. The rules and regulations are being created right now. But during that period of time, you will have 16 and 17-year-olds not going to criminal court, but going to family court for most crimes. And we're talking about nonviolent crimes here. We're talking about the overwhelming majority of kids that are arrested for theft or all sorts of things that they might be accused of will be treated like kids. And we'll make sure that that one mistake that was made doesn't change the rest of their lives.
And follow them forever. And there have been scientific studies that show that the teenage brain is still forming, and then by 16, 17...
I remember when I was a 16-year-old idiot.
You're just still not where you're going to be.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very important thing, and I think most people in the Bronx would agree that throwing somebody into jail at 16 or 17 for something where they maybe can be rehabilitated in juvenile court or family court would be the better way to go.
Absolutely. And this is something that I'm very glad to say most of my colleagues agreed with, even Republicans. They recognize that for a mistake of a 16-year-old should not change the life of someone forever. And when you consider, one of my former constituents was a gentleman by the name of Khalif Browder. And Khalif, his story is infamous. He spent 3 years at Rikers Island because he was accused of stealing a backpack. He spent 3 years in Rikers Island because he refused to declare himself guilty for something he didn't do. After 3 years, the charges were dropped. But because of most of the time that he spent in Rikers was in solitary confinement, the horrible things that happened to him there led him to take his own life. And so when you have someone who at 19, has spent 3 years of his life inside a correctional facility for having done absolutely nothing. That's a reality of hundreds, if not thousands, of kids over the history of our state. So I'm glad that we're moving in a positive direction in that regard.
What type of powers do you think that the judges are going to have in family court with respect to those who end up committing some types of crimes at 16 or 17?
Well, ultimately, what they're going to...
Is there going to be a lot of discretion, do you think?
There's definitely going to be discretion, but and there was a lot of discussion about where exactly the discretion would be. I think that we landed in a good place. Ultimately, what you have is that there's going to be a process by which these kids will be treated like kids, and their supposed actions, right? Because everyone's alleged, an alleged criminal until they're proven guilty. They will be treated and said, okay, so what exactly happened? How can we address the situation that led to this person doing this, that, or the other thing, as opposed to just saying you're going to go and sit in jail for 3 years and then go to, have to go through a process where you might eventually commit, but you might eventually be found guilty and have to be in a correctional facility with adults.
And speaking of correctional facilities, Rikers Island, I really just, something has to be done.
I'm on the record as saying that it should be closed.
Really should be at this point, or something has to be done, because the horror stories that come out of Rikers Island, which is really almost a halfway house for for people that they just sit there for so long before they finally get a trial.
It is. It's actually.
It's demoralizing.
I don't know if you've been to Rikers
I
Island.
have on many occasions for clients that either had issues there, they've falsely arrested, accident cases. I've been there. I've seen it. I've been there myself.
I've been there a few times, and obviously in my official capacity, it is a different experience than those individuals that are taken there when they're being held. But just even in those circumstances, when I'm being toured around and treated respectfully, et cetera, it is a demoralizing place.
Absolutely.
And I think that ultimately we need to rethink the system. I have been on the record as saying that it should be closed. I am thankful that the mayor agrees with many activists that have been pushing for this, and I think that we need to work with the mayor to make sure that it happens in an expedited time frame. 10 years is too long.
Airbnb.
Yes.
I have no problem with Airbnb. I think they give you opportunities to be able to see other places and avoid hotels, save some money, get to really know a community by living in somebody's apartment or house or home. But Airbnb probably should be regulated in some respects, safe and security. Talk to me.
I would have no problem with Airbnb if they were a good faith actor. If you have, the law of the state of New York is clear. You cannot have, particularly rent stabilized apartments, be short-term hotel rentals. You just can't. So if you own a home and you have empty nest syndrome, two of your kids, they went off to college, they got married, etc., and you have 2 extra rooms in your home that you own, God bless.
Sure.
Rent them out and certainly provide that opportunity to people, etc. The reality is in the city of New York in particular, this is a system that has been abused, and it's a system that people that like myself who are advocates for housing fairness, looking at their data, right? We're just looking, for example, at the Airbnb website. So we're not looking behind the scenes, right? We're not looking at all the information that they have as the company that gets these listings. We're just looking at the listings. We can identify thousands of illegal listings.
Yeah.
So if I could do that as just an observer, you should be able to do that as a company. And consistently, and this is where they really get me. Consistently, they have refused to do that. They have refused to take down the illegal listings. They have refused to change the parameters so that people that are putting these illegal listings up can't do it. I mean, they're facilitating people breaking the law, and this is the big problem. That's one problem, but the bigger problem is the impact that they have on the housing market as a whole. I live just a couple of blocks from New England College here, and the median income in my district is about $27,000 a year. The affordability crisis hits my district. I have about 70,000 units of rent-stabilized apartments in my district. I am one of them. I live in one of them myself, just a few blocks away. And the pressure that a system like Airbnb facilitates puts on the housing system, on housing stock at large, makes it so that working class people and folks that live in my neighborhood are finding it harder to get a place that they can afford. I see it every day when people come into my district office and have issues where they can barely afford to live where they are. They're trying to find a place that they can afford. And so when you have a company that is, again, a bad faith actor, and this I'm saying based on what their actions and their lack of action has been for the time that I've been in the Senate, they are a bad faith actor and they're facilitating people breaking the law.
Yeah.
And it puts a pressure on the housing market that ultimately impacts my constituency directly. I'm not a fan.
So what is the solution, do you think?
Well, part of the solution certainly, we certainly did a very good thing passing a bill just last year that actually makes it a little bit more transparent, but there are some pieces of legislation which are currently on the docket that have not been passed that I think we need to pass, because ultimately, again, look, if you have a private home and you want to rent a couple of rooms from it, God bless you.
Yeah.
And God bless Airbnb for facilitating that. But the fact is that is not what the system is doing right now. We need to make sure that they are not allowed to do that.
All right, let's talk politics. Tell me
Indeed.
what's going on.
I know a little bit about politics.
Tell me what's going on in your neck of the woods.
Well, in my neck of the woods, listen, I've been in the Senate for 7 years, and I've been part of the Democratic Conference for the entire time that I've been there. There's a lot of things that we've fought for over the years, whether we're just talking about housing, whether we're talking about stronger rent laws, whether we're talking about health care, in the case of the single-payer bill that I sponsor, whether we're talking about the women's right to choose. We've been pushing for the women's equality agenda including a plank that would actually codify Roe v. Wade in state law. We've been pushing for all of these things. These are things that the Democratic Conference has stood for and that New Yorkers stand for. And sadly, we have not been able to do it because there has been a Republican-controlled Senate majority.
Yes.
That unfortunately has had a deal with breakaway Democrats that have kind of empowered them. But we're very clear right now. There's a lot of folks that have woken up to the fact that the IDC, or Independent Democratic Conference, exists. I have been on the record since the inception of the IDC in 2011. I believe that we would do so much better as a united Democratic Conference. And if there is a deal to be made between our leader, Andrea Stewart Cousins, and Jeff Klein, the leader of the IDC, for a shared leadership structure, much like the one that Jeff had with Dean Skelos, a former and now, convicted majority leader for the Senate, for the Senate Republican Conference. If there is a deal to be had between the both of them to share power and have a Democratic majority, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
So I would say that particularly now, in the era of the Orange Madness, we end as we began on the Orange Madness. In the era of the Orange Madness, when there's so much things that we are getting, so many attacks that are coming from the federal government, for every vulnerable population that you can think of, we are in a place where we have to defend our people. We have to defend New Yorkers. And the best way to do that is to have a majority a Democratic majority in the Senate that can actually push for policies that will resist these things that are happening from the federal government.
And what do you think in terms of the odds of that actually happening, in terms of getting Jeff Klein to maybe agree to share power? What do you
I think that we've been moving in that direction for a while, and I'm hoping that we get to be in a place where it happens pretty soon. Ultimately, there is a recognition, and just the astonishing craziness of the last couple of days shows us a little bit more of what we have to fight against. It is best that we do it, and I understand there's private issues, there's personal issues that have existed before. Yeah. Personal animosities must be put to the side right now, and we have to think about who we have to defend and who we work for. And to do that, the best and most effective way to do that is to have a majority Democratic conference leading in the state Senate.
And on that note, and hopefully we can be strong against the Orange Madness, we will say goodbye, but hopefully you will come back.
I'm not too far, bro.
No, you're not far at all.
No, sir.
But thanks so much for being here. All
Absolutely.
right. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Senator Rivera, for joining us, and you for tuning in. We hope you'll continue to join us as we go inside the districts all around our great borough. I'm David Lesh. You can catch me Tuesday nights at 6:30 on Today's Verdict. We'll see you next time.